Well, the proposal X608 was sent out to aircraft production companies, Lockheed, Boeing, Constellation. You can see the name up there. It was pretty much everybody. They were all invited to bid on this aircraft. And the specifications called for an airspeed of at least 360 miles per hour at an altitude and a climb rate of to 20,000 feet in 6 minutes. And it was one of the toughest specs that the United States Army Air Corps had ever written. Lieutenant Kelsey and Lieutenant Savelle, who drew up the specifications, used the word interceptor, which I thought this was interesting, as a way of bypassing a very inflexible Army Air Corps requirement for pursuit aircraft to carry no more than 500 pounds of armament, including ammunition, as well as the restriction of a single-seat aircraft to one engine. So they were breaking new ground, writing the specification, and made sure they didn't want to call it a fighter, so they called it an interceptor. Well, of course, we all know that a lot of people on that contract, and Hall Hibbert and, of course, Kelly Johnson, the design team, came up with one of the boldest departures ever. And as you can see over here in the lower right-hand corner, they actually came up with 6 different configurations for the P-38. And some of them look pretty bizarre. Some of them look somewhat familiar. This almost looks like the twin P-51 right here. Very unusual. They actually ended up going with number 4, which is the upper right-hand corner right here. And the rest is history. Hibbert realized that there was no single aircraft engine that could meet all of the specs, so they knew they had to go with the twin engine configuration. He looked into the new Alice in 1710, which had just been tested to deliver 1,000 horsepower at for 150 hours, and they would use 2 of these in the design. And of course, then it had the 4 50 caliber machine guns and the 20mm cannon. And of course, the Lightning's tricycle landing gear was a first, as was the twin boom configuration, first for American aircraft, combat aircraft. There were quite a few deviations from what had gone before. And it's very novel and very unique, and it's very unusual that a plane this different would go into production as quickly as it did. But the fact of the matter was the United States Army Air Corps really needed this aircraft. They needed to do battle with ME-109s and other aircraft, of course, that were flying at the high altitudes. The problem with this particular, the XP-38, it was set up to do a demonstration. It flew from Marchfield to Mitchell Field in New York and almost set a speed record. Actually, Howard Hughes still have that. But they were attempting to land in New York, and they had problems with icing the carburetor, and they ended up in a sand trap in a golf course and destroyed their plane. That one and only XP-38 was a total loss with less than 12 hours on the airplane, just 16 days after it rolled out. However, it did demonstrate that it was fast, averaging 340 miles per hour cross country, indicated airspeed, and with a tailwind, provided a ground speed of 420 miles an hour. So it could move. It was a good thing. Again, it was built in Burbank, and of course at that time, following the attack on Pearl Harbor and sub-sightings off the San Francisco Bay and Japanese shelling of an oil refinery in Santa Barbara, everyone was very concerned about protecting West Coast military facilities and production facilities. And the job of disguising California fell on Colonel John Ulmer, who was a pioneer of camouflage, deception, and misdirection techniques expert. During the Battle of Britain in 1940, he observed how carefully made and positioned camouflage caused the Luftwaffe to waste thousands of tons of bombs just bombing empty fields where they thought there were factories. So it was proven to work. So with the help of scenic designers from Hollywood, of course you've come to Hollywood for all of your set designers, lighting experts and carpenters and whatnot. And they went to work disguising quite a few of the plants in Southern California. Here you can see it before and after. This is the plant in Burbank before, and this is after they covered it with canvas and a bunch of 3D looking canvas houses and streets. So it did very much look like a residential area. Here you can see what's underneath some of those canvases, parking lots, and on top, of course, you can see houses, trees, and nice green ones. So there were 10,037 P-38s built in various models and configurations, mostly built in Burbank. Consolidated Vultee built 113 of the L models in Nashville, Tennessee to meet wartime needs. It was very much towards the end of the war. It was the only U.S. combat aircraft that was in production from the very beginning to the end of World War II. Here you can see, whoops, let me back up. You can see the plant interior of the plant in Burbank. They also did some work outdoors, and they did some things at night. Daytime, indoors, outdoors, daytime, nighttime, they were cranking on those. They were very difficult to build. They were not a plane designed for really, it was a hand built, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It was a very difficult plane to build. It was also a plane of firsts. I feel like I'm on some kind of a revolving pedestal. Really lazy suited. The P-38 racked up a very impressive list of firsts. It was the first Lockheed designed military aircraft to go into series production. It was the first twin interceptor in the United States Army Air Force. It's the first twin boom fighter to go into production from the United States. The first production fighter powered by the Allison inline V-1710. The first modern fighter with a tricycle gear. And the first American plane to use butt joints and flush rivets in external surfaces. And then also the first one to use extensive use of stainless steel. And it was the first one to have a normal canopy. And the first fighter with speeds over 400 miles per hour. It was also the first Army Air Corps fighter to shoot down a German aircraft. And it was the first fighter to carry out the United States, carry out escort missions all the way to Berlin. And it accounted for something like 1,800 kills in the Pacific theater. So it was quite a few firsts. Okay, specifications, as I mentioned earlier, 2 Allison engines started out at about 1,100 horsepower, but by the end of the war, when the J and L models were coming out, it was up to 1,400 horsepower per engine, supercharged turbos, of course. Cruising speed about 290 miles an hour, but maximum is 414. The service ceiling is about 39,000 to 44,000 feet, and it would climb at about 3,300 feet per minute, so it was quite the climber. Combat range was 410 miles with internal fuel tanks, but of course with external fuel tanks, and they would add anywhere from 265-gallon fuel tanks up to 300-gallon fuel tanks. Of course, tremendous mileage, distance, range at that point in time. Armament-wise, the P-38s were so effective they could reliably hit targets up to 1,000 yards away. Most other fighters were effective at about 100 to 200, maybe 300 yards out. Had 150 rounds for the 20mm cannon and 500 rounds for each 50 caliber gun. So it really was quite the beast. And the fact that you're flying and you're aiming, you're flying right towards your target, being very, very powerful and accurate. Variants. There are several different variants of the P-38 over time. Of course, the first one, as I mentioned, only lasted 16 days. That was the XP prototype. They made several evaluation versions of the YT-38. The A's and B's and C's, they were primarily experimental as well. The A was actually one where they tested a pressurized cockpit, decided not to go forward with that. There were 30 of them that went into P-38 initial production. The actual operational aircraft didn't start until E's, F's, and G's. And those are the ones that saw combat early on. And of course, full-scale production saw your H, J's, L's, and M's. It was really kind of in my opinion, a Swiss Army knife. I mean, this thing would do everything. It was modified to do many different tasks and missions over time. Now, we all heard the story of compressibility issues with the P-38. And the reason, well, it hit P-38 first, it was the first plane fast enough for that to really become a problem. Some people would call it compressibility of shock stall as well. In a sustained dive from a high altitude, the speed would build up quickly, and airflow over the wings would actually break the sound barrier. Not that the plane was, but the air going over the wings were breaking the sound barrier, causing a shock wave there, and that wave of air was going back into the tail, causing some problems. It destroyed the lift over the wing, and also caused the wind hitting the tail to actually nose down. So it was a serious problem. It's something that they lost quite a few planes and pilots in the process of figuring this out. So Lockheed produced what they call compression flaps. There's kits that were retrofitted onto these planes, and I don't know that any of the retrofits really worked, that they actually got installed, but I do know that after the J's, the late J models, they were actually building those eye flaps or compression flaps at the factory and the production line. The 23 Skidoo that we have sitting on here is an early J. It doesn't have the compression flaps on it, but you'll notice if you look at the Collins gray P-38, that's an L, and it has compression flaps, which you can look at after we finished here, basically. So the first Lightning C active service was actually an F4 version, a photo recon plane. It was a P-38B. It was fitted up with 4K17 cameras, and of course all the armor was taken off. And it joined the 8th Photographic Squadron in Australia in April of 1942. And during the war, there was a saying that fighters win battles, but photographs win wars. And the P-38 was really, aside from the fact it was a good fighter and interceptor and escort plane, it was also a fantastic photo recon platform. It was very stable. And with a high speed, high altitude, it really did a very good job. It was used quite a bit for that purpose. There were 120 F4s built and about 1,200 F5s that were built. And if you were down here to Yanks Museum, they've got F5 sitting out there. Really nothing more than the nose cone taken off, all the armament removed, cameras installed, and windows put into place, so obviously the cameras can see what's going on. Again, the P-38 is a Swiss Army knife. It was used for a lot of different purposes. Here it is, it's a night fighter, and Lockheed got a contract to convert quite a few of these. And they had a radar pod under the nose, and space for a dedicated radar operator in the rear extension of the cockpit. This is kind of an unusual setup here. You can see in this picture here, here's a pilot, and they've got this little radar operator bombardier guy sitting back here in this bubble. This is not quite as good a picture right here, but it was something that worked. They produced 75 of these, and flew for the first time in 1945, January 45. There was also one of them called the Droopscoop. And like many like many World War II fighters, they developed from fighter, they kind of morphed into bombers, and that happened, of course, with the Droopscoop. And that was a bit, it could carry two 2,000-pound bombs on internal fuel. Of course, the key to this was taking the armament off the nose and putting in room for a bombardier. And here's this little seat right here. And of course, then you have a glass nose with a little flat glass up front here. The Norton bomb sight would stick through here. So that was very successful. Then there was the P-38L Pathfinder. This was designed to give the P-38 an all-weather bombing capability. Like the Droopscoop, it replaced the guns with the bombardier station. And in this case, the station carried a radar unit behind it, an opaque dome, radar. So actually, the bombardier guy was sitting back in the area behind the radar, back in this area here. And I have no idea how anybody would get out of something like that if he had to bail out and be toast. And here's one that's kind of interesting. Don't know how many of these cookies were made, but there was. Oh my God! This poor sucker must have done something wrong. Yeah, really. But they experimented with these little evacuation pods for wounded people, and I guess one article mentioned that it could have been used for inserting special forces into certain areas. to get it took off. Very fun.
Can I say something real quick about that?
Yeah.
The guy in there is a very famous photographer named David Duncan.
This guy.
And that right there, what he's doing is this is on Okinawa, and he did a famous series of photos where there's Corsair shooting rockets named Okinawa.
Yeah.
So he was there specifically for a photo shoot. He was a Marine Corps officer, and a famous lifetime photographer. So that's what he's doing. That's actually specific for.
Oh, so
And
these
there's
are.
pictures on the internet where you'll see a P-38 with 4 Corsairs. That's it. And that's actually an F-5.
Oh, great. Well, thanks a lot, Chris. Well, in March of 1940, French and British ordered a total of about 667 P-38s. They were P-38 variants, and the Allies really wanted a complete commonality with the Allison engines that were on their Curtiss P-40 Tomahawks. And so this is why they did not want to have supercharged engines, and also the twin right-hand engines instead of the kind of rotating engines that we have, basically. So there was nothing devious about it. It wasn't that these superchargers were top secret or anything like that. They just plain didn't want them. It was all about money for them, the interchangeability between these engines and the engines on their P-40s. The British didn't like the P-38, and they actually canceled that large order. They ended up with only 3 of the 143 Lightning 1s. Interestingly enough, like the Mustang, the British actually named the P-38 the Lightning. So it's kind of an interesting connection there. But things changed after December 7th, 1941, and whatever they were ordering, of course the French didn't need their P-38s because the Germans had overrun them before they received them. After December 7th, it was great that we were able to actually use those P-38s, and they were brought. If they had not already been sent, they were told to stand down and stay on the West Coast, and basically be used to control the West Coast for possible Japanese invasion. So the air campaign in Europe is having issues, disastrous bombing losses. This is back in the days when we were trying to do daylight bombing without escorts. So they decided to rush out 2 P-38 combat groups to England in October of 1943. That was the 55th Fighter Group. They became the first to conduct operations. And then on November of that year, they shot down ME-109 and FW-190 to be racking up the first aerial victories. The P-38 performed useful in Europe, but suffered some engine problems. And Allison engines continued to throw rods and swallow valves and valve plugs, and their intercoolers weren't all that reliable as well. Some of them were stuck in overboost or underboost mode. And of course, when you're fighting a battle at 30,000 feet, you need all the help you can get in terms of your boost and reliability. Things did get better as time went on, and the arrival of the J's and L's pretty much made that happen. So the top brass of the 8th Air Force was wondering why the P-38 was not doing better. Everyone kind of thought it would do well. It was designed to do well. It was designed to fight battles at 30,000 feet and be an interceptor, and an escort command, of course. But as reported by Colonel Rao, the 20th Fighter Group Commander, he was assigned to investigate this. And he really was looking forward to it, but he did a report, and he came to the conclusion that the average pilot probably couldn't fly the P-38 very well because their training wasn't sufficient. There was issues with the fact that the twin booms made it easy for the Germans to recognize an enemy fighter when they looked like that. Cockpit heating was poor, causing them to get very cold. It's difficult to actually fly like that when your hands are freezing. They had a very, unsuccessful heating process with tubes coming out of the engine. It didn't quite work. Later, P-38s actually had plug-ins where you would wear a heated suit, like you would see on the B-17 bombers eventually. And also the restriction of the dives because of the compressibility problem, that was a problem. Engine failures were very common, and the roll rate was pretty poor. So Jimmy Doolittle, at that time the commander of the Air Force, decided to pull all the P-38s out of Europe. And there was only one fighter group in Northern Europe that stayed all the way through the war, and that was the 474th, who arrived and stayed there. P-38 was ideally suited for the Pacific theater. It possessed a performance markedly superior to all the Japanese opponents. It possessed a range significantly better than that of the P-39, P-40, and P-47s that were available in 1942 in Southwest Pacific. Its twin engines also offered an additional safety factor when operating over long stretches of open water. If you use an engine, you can probably still get back with one engine. It was also very rugged, and it could take a lot of battle damage and some deep flying. Missions lasting 9, 10, or 12 hours became routine, and many wounded Lightnings were able to limp home only one engine. The maneuverability of the P-38 was inferior to the nimble Japanese opponents, but by the use of appropriate tactics, for example, avoiding getting into dogfights at low altitudes, and the use of fast diving attacks, they were able to perform well in the Kitty and the Solomons to achieve some very impressive results. All right. So perhaps the single event that highlighted the P-38's role in the Pacific was the famous shooting down of Admiral Yamamoto, his Betty bomber, in Logan in the Solomon Islands. And Brian will be talking more about that following my presentation. So I want to get into that right. Okay, aces. There were over 100 P-38 pilots that became aces. Richard Long, of course, is the famous one because he was the ace of the American aces with 40 kills. And interestingly enough, or sadly enough, he died testing a P-80 the same day the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. With 38 victories, Tom McGuire was headed out on a mission where he possibly could have beaten Dick Bond's record. The ace of aces, but sadly he never returned from that mission. And both of them received a Medal of Honor, of course. McGuire got his posthumously. And we've got Charles McDonald from the 475th. You can hear more about 475th later on this morning. And his Papa Maru, he had 27 kills. And Gerald Johnson, 22, and Jay Robbins, 22 kills as well. So there are a few flyable P-38s left. You'll find them also on static display at many museums. Of course, one of the most famous is Glacier Girl. That's an F model that is owned by Lewis Air Legends. And we all know the story. Hopefully you should find and follow up and check out about the story about how they found Glacier Girl. There's a National Geographic special on that. It was something like 200 feet of ice. They had to build some special drills just to get it out of there. And of course, on the right over here, we have our 23 Skidoo. Painted as if it was in the 475th Fighter Group, P.J. Dahl's aircraft. And then we have White 33 from Westpac Restorations. I think that's probably the newest flying the air. And Honey Bunny, I don't think they call it Honey Bunny anymore, it's just 981. That's what we hear at Allied Fighters. Tangerine, Telephone Air Museum, that's an L. And the Red Bull in Austria have an L as well. That used to be the old White Lightning that crashed in Europe, and they picked it up and restored it. Somebody restored it for them. And Scat 3, that's an L model. It's in the Fagan Fighter Museum. And Spotzer Midnight is an L model owned by Tom Creek. So again, I just want to give you a broad brush overview of P-38, whet your appetite. Maybe I said you've got a question, and maybe some of these follow-on presenters can answer some of those questions. Okay, thank you.
As a quick aside, there were a couple other modifications done to the P-38 too with the compressibility problem. If you look at the very earliest YP-13 series pre-production airplanes, they lost at least one of them up in Glendale here. Ralph Burton was the pilot, and they lost the tail. Strangely enough, the thing flew into a house, and the people actually slept through the airplane accident. They actually lived through that. Anyway, they put a kind of like a fillet where the leading edge of the inboard part of the wing meets the center nacelle fuselage. They actually put a fillet in there, like a glove-like fillet. That was an attempt to change the airflow over the wing. No, Chris?
The fillet against the fuselage tail buffering.
Tail buffering.
What happens is the same thing if you lower the window at even an inch.
Yeah.
You'll get through this, through the buffering. Give it a life.
The fillet against the fuselage is for tail buffeting, which is different than compressibility. So if you don't have that fillet, what happens, and they found out very early, is that the rough air that's turbulent around there bangs into the tail, and you can feel it. And as you go faster, it gets quite noticeable, even more so noticeable. Same thing as if you open those side windows, you can't open those in flight. You open them even that much, the tail's banging, and even if it's open 3 or 4 inches, it's almost, the airplane is shaking to where you can't see that much. So the fillet along the side of the fuselage, that's the tail buffeting. Compressibility is shock flow and drag going around the airframe. That's the dive recovery flaps, and those did 2 things. One, the number one thing it did is change the center of gravity. We're mentioned about the nose tuck. The number one thing those dive recovery flaps do is change the center of gravity to pitch the nose up. And then it also acts as a dive flap or speed brake, if you will, to slow it down. But when they get that nose up, obviously airspeed will decrease, and also you get more drag. So there's 2 different things that were going on, which was tail buffet, and then there's compressibility, which did buffet the airplane and tail, but there were 2 different problems.
On Ralph Burton's plane, one of the YPs, the entire horizontal stabilizer and the rudders came off. It just came off, and then also Kelly Johnson maintained that those balance horns on the elevator to his dying day maintained they were useless. If some other engineer figured they'd put them on there, but he said, no, we don't need them. They put them on there as a safety margin. All right, Mr. Finnegan, you're going to talk about the Yamamoto shoot-down, April 18th, 1943.
Yeah. But first, I forgot to mention we have kind of a new feature today. In the lobby of the Aviation Discovery Center, we have a green screen set up. We have a pair of professional photographers who will take your picture, and then they will superimpose a P-38 behind you as a souvenir of today. Nominal charge, but I've seen the samples. It looks real, so it's great. It seems like World War II, more than any other conflict, produced legendary characters, if you will, individuals who live on today, and certainly one of those is Admiral Yamamoto. He was the Commander-in-Chief and the primary strategist for the Japanese war actions against the United States and the Allies. He was convinced early in his career of the value of air power, and he helped shepherd the Japanese Navy into the carrier realm. They had really the strongest carrier force at the outbreak of World War II. Prior to the war, he had spent time in the United States. He had attended classes at Harvard, and he had also worked as an emissary in Washington. And he was known to many of the top Navy brass. He was known as a very punctual individual, soft-spoken, but very forceful, quiet type individual. He also knew an awful lot about the Americans, and this played into his role in planning the attack on Pearl Harbor and the subsequent strategy. He really realized that the Japanese had 6 months to a year in which to get the United States to the negotiating table. After that, he realized all bets were off, because once we turned on that industrial machine, Japan was really going to be behind the 8 ball. And yet, being the good soldier that he was, he pursued forward. his strategy was effective. Within the first few months of the war, Japan had conquered a vast amount of territory. The entire western rim of the Pacific belonged to Japan. It really caught us unawares, not only at Pearl Harbor, but everywhere else. And, it was this that really kind of almost gave them overconfidence, if you will, at that point. But true to his prediction, again, of the 6-month time frame, 6 months into the war, we begin to see a shift. The Battle of Pearl Sea in May of 1942, which technically I think is considered a draw, but the Japanese lose a carrier. In June of 42, the Battle of Midway, and this is far more devastating to them. 4 carriers sunk, and his entire plan of westward, or at least I guess eastward expansion, put in shambles. And then from August 1942 until February of 43, the Battle for Guadalcanal, where the United States finally pushed the Japanese off of Guadalcanal and have now got a foothold in the Solomon Islands. This, in fact, begins to cause Yamamoto to reconsider his strategy. He's realizing the Japanese are overextended, and he's actually formulating a new strategy where he's actually going to abandon the Solomons and abandon New Guinea and build a more formidable defense line using truck as kind of the barrier. And what he really needs is the troops that are in the South Pacific to hold as long as possible. And so if we look at the map of the South Pacific, you can see Guadalcanal down in the lower right, which is really the only U.S. Allied-held territory. Everything else in the South Pacific, in the middle, you see Bougainville in the middle there, and then all the way up to Rabaul, which is where the large Japanese base was. So all this was under Japanese control. Part of his idea is that if I'm going to ask these men to stand to the last against this push while we retrench ourselves further up in the oceans, I need to kind of get their morale boosted. And so he decides to go on a morale boost trip. The date is April 18th, 1943. And partly because of the Japanese concept of saving face, partly because they just want the commanders to be aware, they send a message out on April 13th, 1943, coded in Japanese code. What the Japanese don't know and didn't realize and still couldn't believe at the end of the war was that the Americans in 1942 had finally cracked the military code of the Japanese, and we could read their mail. 3 stations received this message simultaneously. Station Nagant in Washington, D.C., the station in Melbourne, and Station Haipo in Hawaii. And Station Haipo had played an instrumental role in the Midway and in deciphering the Midway code. They went right to work on this immediately. They recognized at first glance that it had a number of times and dates on it, and so they realized there was some importance to it. And as they jumped into it, they began to realize even more so that this was important. As you can see, it says 18 April, Commander-in-Chief, Combined Fleet will visit, and then there are coded entries for places, and then it goes on to talk about his entire itinerary, where he'll be at each point in time. So they continued to work on this on that very day. They worked around the clock and finally deciphered where those places were. And so now they had his exact location and at the exact times that he would be there. And knowing him to be the punctual individual that they were, they realized they had an opportunity here. And so they went to Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet Forces. And he had this evidence before him, and he asked his staff, should we go after Yamamoto? And the real question was, if we do, will it help to shorten the war? And the answer they got back was, yes, that we don't believe there's anyone waiting in the wings of his caliber. And so the next question is, well, how would we do it? And they played with a number of ideas, submarine, Navy ships, and they finally realized air power was really the only way they could have an opportunity to intercept Yamamoto. But looking at the aircraft, the Navy had nothing that had the range, but the Army did in the P-38. And even with that, it needed auxiliary fuel tanks. It needed almost 430 gallons of additional fuel tanks. to make this trip. But he made the decision to go forward, and he sent a message to Halsey with the ending of good luck and good hunting. This was going to be the first time in United States military history that the military would target an individual. At that time, we only had targeted armies or other troops, never an individual. As we saw in post-2001, once again, we targeted an individual. The gentleman selected to plan and orchestrate the attack was Major John W. Mitchell. He was recently named squadron commander of the 339th Fighter Squadron. They were based on Guadalcanal. He now spends the next 2 days and nights, he gets very little sleep over this time, trying to figure out how to do this. Using the times of the intercepted message, Mitchell calculates the speed of the Japanese aircraft and determines that it matches that of a G4M Betty bomber. He then calculates an interception point, and based on this, determines an interception time of 0945 a.m. And then working backward from this time, he then plans the mission down to the minute. He has 18 P-38s available to him. He designates 4 as what he calls the kill flight. Should the squadron intercept Yamamoto, these 4 aircraft will dive into the attack to take out the aircraft, while the other 14 aircraft fly cover. Now, because they can't fly undetected over those Japanese-held islands, he develops an ocean route. And he breaks this into 4 different legs, and each leg of the flight is determined by a compass heading and time based on an average speed of each aircraft of 197 miles per hour. The squadron of 18 planes will fly under radio silence, and they'll use dead reckoning to fly the course. They even installed a Navy compass in his aircraft because they knew Navy compasses were more reliable than Army compasses. He's going to fly as mission leader. The other pilots will fly behind him. And they have applied this pre-established compass heading at the specified speeds for the specified direction. During a briefing, the pilots are given an alternative story. They're told that they're going after a high-ranking officer, but they're told that the information is coming from an Australian coast watcher who uncovered this information. Again, they're trying to protect the fact that we have the Japanese code. Because again, if the Japanese learn that we've broken the code, they'll simply change it and we'll be back to square one. So this cover story is given to the pilots. On the morning of April 18th, Mitchell leads the mission. They take off at 7:10, which was 10 minutes ahead of his original schedule. And 2 aircraft, ironically, they were part of the kill flight, have mechanical issues. One can't get his fuel tank to feed, and the other has a flat tire, so they return to base. And 2 alternates that have been named take their place in the kill flight. At 7:25, they rally together and they begin the planned 2-hour 20-mission flight. So you can see on here, they leave Henderson and they fly this first leg from 7:25 at 265 degrees, 197 miles an hour for 55 minutes. That's 183 miles. Leg 2, 290 degrees, 197 miles an hour for 27 minutes. That's 88 miles. Leg 3, 305 degrees, 197 miles an hour for 38 minutes. Leg 4, 020 degrees at 197 for 5 minutes, 16 miles. Yamamoto, along with several key staff members, take off from Lakunai Field in Raval at 7:45 in 2 G4M Betty bombers. So they're up here. Each aircraft features a crew of 7, and they're quickly joined by 6 A6M2Z fighters arranged in 2 V-shaped groups to fly cover for the 2 bombers. They're traveling a 315-mile journey. They go through all 4 of the planned legs. They fly at an altitude of 50 feet above the ocean. They're actually told, don't look out at the water, because it will either hypnotize you or disorient you. And so they're also, as Chris just alluded to, they have to keep the windows closed, so it's incredibly hot and stuffy inside those cockpits for this trip. But they end up making the rest of the trip without mishap. At 0934, 11 minutes earlier than Mitchell had estimated, radio silence was broken among the P-38s what we call bogeys, 11 o'clock high. So that'd basically be there. So the kill flight is 4 gentlemen, Captain Thomas Lampier, who happens to be a Cal Aero graduate too, by the way. He graduated in the 1941 Legion last year at Chico Airport. And his wingman was Lieutenant Rex Barber. They're also joined by the 2 alternates, Besby Holmes and Ray Hahn, 2 lieutenants. And they now go down after the 2 Betty bombers and the 6 Japanese Zeros. The remaining 12 P-38s climb up to 18,000 feet to provide top cover. They're expecting other Zeros, once the radio calls go out, they're expecting other Zeros to join in the fight, but it doesn't happen. There's no. So Lampier and Barber go after the first Betty bomber. The Zeros rise to meet them, and Lampier engages the Zeros. Barber continues to pursue the G4M and begins firing, and immediately strikes the aircraft. He sees smoke build from the right engine, and he continues to pour bullets into the aircraft. He riddles it even along one side. It continues to descend as Barber now weaves to stay in. He's going so fast, he has to weave to slow down in order to stay with the slow-moving bomber. Holmes and Hine go after the second Betty bomber, but they too are intercepted by Zeros, and they take evasive action from the Zeros while this bomber heads out over the ocean. Back to Barber, he sees parts of the bomber that he's been engaging with begin to fall off, and it noses down into the jungle. He doesn't see it crash, but he does see smoke later. Holmes and Hine have now caught up to the Betty bomber and are in pursuit. As they fire into it, they actually overshoot it and fly past it. But Barber has also now joined the fight, and he begins to pour bullets into this Betty as well. And so the bomber smokes, disintegrates, and crash lands into the sea. The Zeros mysteriously have departed. And so the P-38s now head for home. There are some that are low on fuel, and they have to land at alternative fields in the Russell Islands. The aircraft that did crash into the jungle was indeed the one that Admiral Yamamoto was on board. He suffers bullet wounds, a bullet to the back and a bullet to the jaw that exits through his eye socket, and death was instantaneous, even before the crash. There are no other survivors of this aircraft. The Japanese recover his body and the other remains the next day on April 19th. But they don't announce that he's dead for another month. They wait until May 23rd to announce it. His cremated remains are brought back to Japan, and the entire nation of Japan mourned his loss. The second bomber had 3 survivors, including Yamamoto's chief of staff, Vice Admiral Hitomi Ugaki. Sorry about the mispronunciation. This is actually Yamamoto's bomber as it sits today in the jungles of Bolivar. Ray Hine does not return from the flight. No one saw him go down. No remains of his aircraft or him were ever found. And today is a mystery where he crashed, but they believe he crashed into the ocean. Controversy now begins to erupt. So after Lampier went to meet the Zeros, when the kill fight was called in, everybody kind of lost sight of where he went. But he, as they're flying in, he breaks radio silence and he does a victory roll and he says, "I shot that son of a bitch." He won't be negotiating peace terms in the White House anymore. And the others are kind of cool about it. They say, well, maybe he did shoot him. I don't know. And for a while there, they think that there's 3 Betty bombers. They think that Barber shot down one. Lampier's claiming he shot down one. And then Holmes and Barber are saying they shot down the third one. But it turns out there were just 2. So the big question mark is, what did Lampier do? they also begin to kind of talk it up a little bit too much, and the brass gets mad. And they were all going to be up for Medal of Honor, and because they had loose lips, they all got kind of downgraded to Navy Crosses. No zeros were down in the attack. So the loss of Yamamoto was indeed a blow to the Japanese. True to his predictions, to the predictions of Nimitz's staff, there was no single leader of his caliber to assume the duties for the rest of the war. Vice Admiral Fukudome said it best. His loss dealt an almost unbearable blow to the morale of all the military forces of Japan. Subsequently, the remainder of the war for the Japanese really does become a slow retreat back to the home islands until surrender in September of 1945. John Mitchell received the Navy Cross for his role in the mission. He went on to become an victory ace during World War II and shot down 4 MiGs during the Korean War. He died in 1995. Besby Holmes returned to civilian life after the war and lived quietly in Green Bay, California. He passed away in 2006. Thomas Lanphier ended his military service with the end of World War II. He had a successful career in business and served as the vice president for Convair. He died in 1987. Rex Barber retired as a colonel in the Air Force in 1961. On the 60th anniversary of the Yamamoto mission, the Oregon State Legislature named April 18th Rex Barber Day, and a bridge was named in his honor. He died in 2001. The Yamamoto mission was the longest intercept mission of World War II and reflects an achievement in planning, execution, teamwork, and bravery. It is also proof that the P-38 was indeed one of the top fighter interceptors of the Second World War.
And I believe, Brian, I have read, and maybe you can corroborate this or debunk it, that after they had seen the Betty bombers go down, somebody had said over the radio, "Good job, April 18th must be our day," because the year before April 18th was the Doolittle raid on Tokyo.
Yeah, it was actually a exchange, telegram between from Halsey to Nimitz, and he said April 18th must be our day because the Doolittle raid had happened a year to the day before that, and then the Yamamoto shoot down happens on April 18th, 1943. It's an interesting story. It really is. I think the most credit, and he never sought credit, and he never really got his due credit, was to John Mitchell, because it was an incredibly complex plan that he contrived. And even he said, this is a 1 in a million shot that we're going to arrive at the exact same time as these Betty bombers did. But they did it, and then they took the action that they had been trained for. So.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, our next guest speaker actually was a first responder at 9/11. Spent 2 tireless days helping out there. Please welcome Jeff Roche.
Hi everybody. It's an honor to talk to you all. I want to thank Planes of Fame for allowing us to do something a little bit spontaneous, and that is to make a telephone call to New York City today to speak to a P-38 World War II fighter pilot. His name is Dino Cerruti, and I'll give you a little bit of background so that you can understand what I'm hoping to do in collaboration with the museum. I, of course, am from New York, and I did do search and rescue work at the World Trade Center. It was actually 14 days total. So the first 2 were I was on the corner of 72nd Street one morning in New York City, and if you guys have ever been there, they have these little mobile coffee carts that just sort of, show up for a little while and then are towed away. And I went up to get a cup of coffee. And I looked over, and there was a gentleman over there talking to everyone, knew everybody coming by, knew all the dogs' names. How are you today, Marklin? What's going on, Bill? And what an interesting guy. Well, he reaches next to him and he puts on a hat. And the hat has a P-38 insignia on it, and I thought, boy, I, like you, have a lot of respect for warbirds and the pilots that flew them. And I thought, I gotta talk to this guy. So I said, you know, what's the hat all about? I mean, he looked too young to actually get in the war. And he said, well, what do you know about it? I said, well, I think it's the P-38 Lightning. And that's a twin boom, twin engine. And I wanted to talk about it a little bit, try to show what I knew. And he looked at me and he said, not bad, not bad. and he said, well, I said, well, what, why are you wearing the hat? So I used to fly. I was a fighter pilot. Well, that led to a friendship. I asked him if I could sit down and talk with him, and we talked on a corner in New York City for about an hour. And gave me his telephone number, and it began a friendship where I was able to actually call a P-38 fighter pilot, and I would visit him when I would go back home to New York. And one day at his house, we started talking about who was remaining from his squad. And as you all know, there aren't many. And we started to come up with the idea of finding more of these members. And the following project arose, which is we have now found the last 4 remaining members of his squad, the Flying Fiends, based out of the Pacific on the island of Ayashima. And we are trying to get all of them from different parts of the United States here to Chino, to reunite with the 38s, to reunite with themselves, and to talk with you, and to share their experiences, and to capture this very important moment. Any of your support along the way would be really very, very welcome. With that said, we're in the midst of doing that and having some good early dialogue with the folks here. But that leads us to this very early moment, which was Dino would love to have been here for this event. 94 years old, doing damn well, but he has a surgery coming up, and he said, Jeff, I don't know if I can make that trip, and then come back. And then I said, okay, Dino, what about a telephone call? He said, what, am I going to talk to each one of these people? I said, no, Dino. We'll get you hooked up to the mic so you can talk to him. He said, well, let's give it a shot. So he's on standby in cold New York. If you guys can bear with me a little bit, I think what we're going to do with the team here is I'm going to take my microphone. I'm going to try to make this call to Dino. We're going to put it in front of the speaker. Dino will be able to hear you if you have any responses or applause or anything, and we'll ask him a few questions, okay? You guys, can you stand by for one moment, please?
Sure. How fun.
Hello.
Dino, it's Jeff calling.
Hi, Jeff. Happy New Year.
Thank you so much. Dino, we have, wow, I don't know, this is a huge attendance. There's a couple hundred people here for sure. And they can all hear you. Everybody, I'd like you to meet the P-38 fighter pilot, Dino Cerruti.
Soldiers, about 10 degrees.
Well, Dino, I'm sorry, but most of us are in t-shirts and light jackets over here, but we hope this conversation will warm you up a little bit. And Dino, we all thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us.
My pleasure.
Dino, I wanted to cover a couple quick questions with you, and I think maybe we're going to have about 5 or 10 minutes here, and then we'll see how it goes, okay?
Sure.
Okay, sounds good. Dino, how about taking us back to the beginning? Can you tell us when you entered active duty and what your age was at that time, and where were you assigned?
Well, I graduated from high school in June of 1942 because the war had started. College accelerated. I got a scholarship to Yale, and I started Yale 1 month after I graduated from high school. I was 18 years old. I finished my freshman year. Before the end of that year, I was I was interested in flying. I couldn't wait. So I enlisted in October of 1942. I was called up on my 19th birthday in January of 1943, and I was called up in February of 1943, and I was sent to Atlantic City for 10 days basic. Then I took my flight training. I flew the PT-19, a little open cockpit, low wing plane, cruised at about 90 miles an hour, and then we graduated to the PT-13, the Vultee, and then we graduated to the AT-6, the Texan, very famous plane, still used today, great for aerobatics. And I got my wings in 1943, May of 1943, and I was sent to California flew P-39s in Victorville, and then I was sent up to Chico, California to fly P-38s before I went to the Pacific. Basically, that was my training. I got to the Pacific, and I was assigned to the H-Fighter Group, and we were stationed on a little island just a couple of miles off the west coast of Okinawa. The island was about half the size of Manhattan, which is where I live now. The island was about 5 miles long and about 2 miles wide, and had nothing but airplanes on it. We lived in tents. We slept on cots, without springs, without slats, without anything.
Dino, the island's name was Aishima, is that correct?
Shima.
Okay.
Shima.
And so when you were over there, the name of your squad was the Flying Fiends, is that correct?
We were the Flying Fiends, right. We were established way back in 1917. But they didn't name us the Flying Fiends until World War II. And that's still what they call us today. And today my squadron is stationed up in Osan, South Korea, just a few miles south of the North Korean border. Closest fighter squadron in the world to North Korea.
Yeah.
And they're flying F-16s, lucky guys.
Dino, speaking of F-16s, which I know you didn't fly, but can you give us just a list of the aircraft that you have flown, either in training or combat?
Well, as I said, I flew the PT-19, the PT-13, the AT-6, then the P-39, a fighter plane, one of our frontline fighter planes at that time. And then we graduated to the P-38 and then the P-51.
So you had the Mustang as well?
Yeah, that was a hot little airplane. It weighed about 8,000 pounds, half the weight of the P-38. P-38 weighed about 15,000 pounds, about 7 tons.
Dino, when you think about the P-38 in consideration with all the other aircrafts, what is it about the P-38 that you think separates it? We certainly know there's many reasons, but yours personally, what was it that the 38 really stands out in your mind?
Any pilot who has flown the P-38 thinks it is the most beloved, great airplane you can imagine, especially if you're flying over water, a lot of water. And we were stationed on a little tiny island, just a speck in the ocean, Pacific Ocean. Our flights up to Japan and back to 6, 7, 8 hours. And we had 2 engines. That was a great asset of the P-38. Because if you have one engine that goes out, you can fly on one engine.
Did that ever happen to you, Dino? Did you ever lose an engine when you were over there?
Yeah, twice I lost an engine coming back from Japan. And I had to fly the rest of the mission on one engine. And that is when you thank God that you have that second engine. And that's one of the great assets and attributes of the P-38. We loved it. It was a great airplane. Very forgiving, beautiful, counter-rotating props. No torque. You didn't have to worry about stalls. You could just fall out of it very easily. No problems at all. Great airplane. Everybody loved it. The P-51, of course, wasn't any faster than the P-38. They all flew the same. P-47, P-38, P-51. They all of them flew the same miles per hour. But the P-51 is quicker. It reacted quicker. It picked up airspeed quicker. And but the P-38 had counter-rate rotating bombs, and it had all the guns in the nose firing straight ahead. So the other fighter planes, the 47 and the 51, they had the guns mounted in the wings, so they had to be converged. So they crossed. They didn't fly. They didn't shoot straight ahead. They shot at an angle, and they crossed at about, I don't know, 400, 500 yards in front of you. So it's very hard to shoot and hit an enemy. The P-38 was great. They were all shooting forward. And they created a web of steel, seven feet in diameter. A great airplane.
I didn't know that. I never thought about the fact, you're right, that you would have this giant diameter of steel, as you call it, and all firing from the nose.
Four 50 caliber machine guns and one cannon, one 20 millimeter cannon, all firing at it. Unbelievable.
You've got some heads nodding here, Dino, because you've got a very knowledgeable audience. Dino, the island, you used to talk to me about that and how you guys lived over there. And you told me a story, and I don't know if I have this right, but you kind of gave up on the tents and the cots, and so you guys decided that you would sort of throw together your own type of hut.
Yeah, myself and Charlie English from Chicago and Don Sarah from California. He lived in Waparata. He's gone now. He's dead. He passed away about 8 years ago. But he's a great friend of mine, great pilot. And the three of us, found a little place on Ayashima. We put together a hut. We didn't want to live in a tent. So we scrounged around. We found all these aluminum sheets and slats of wood and tarpaulins flying around. And we fashioned up an ugly hut out of all this material. And our doorway was protected us with just a pair of tarpaulin nailed to the top, falling down. It's only the basic needs.
Well, I think I remember you showed me a picture of that. Hopefully, if we get the documentary done and we get you here to visit this crowd, we'll bring in. I'd like to tell everybody, Dino has an amazing collection.
Hey, Kevin, give him the microphone closer to us.
Dino has an amazing collection of his time overseas, every single aircraft he ever flew, pictures of every place he's ever been, and I'm hoping that we can take this amazing, well-documented experience and bring it to you guys. So, I've seen some of it, so hopefully that'll be, you guys can too. We've got one more question here, maybe for you, Dirk, and I don't know if anybody in the crowd wants to ask you anything, but there was one time that you talked to me about, and I think sometimes, this crowd certainly knows, but sometimes you forget about the folks that lost their lives.
Yes, I was going to mention that because it's so important to me. I had some very good friends of mine, and there was one guy, Carl Anthony from Odessa, Texas. He had transferred to our outfit from P-47 outfit, and I remember we were on the same mission one day. He was ahead of me, waiting to take off, and so he got his plane, his P-38, and he went down the runway. We had a short runway on Ayashima. It was only about 3,800 feet long, and really short, and it was later extended to 4,800 feet, but a little late. Anyway, he went down the runway and was taking off, and I was right behind him. I was going to wait until he cleared the runway before I started my takeoff run. I watched him, and he got near the end of the runway, and I saw him kind of pull up and then bounce down. He was bouncing up and down trying to take off, and for some reason he wasn't attaining flying speed. And I remember I saw his wheels start to pull up, and all of a sudden his plane kind of bellied down at the end of the runway. He skid off the end of the runway, and his plane fell off and fell down about 100 feet to the ground. And of course, he was carrying an external gas tank and full ammo, and the whole thing exploded, and he crawled out, but he was on fire. And I took off and went on my mission without him, but I had to fly through the smoke of this burning plane at the end of the runway as I took off. And I went to see him the next day at the hospital, and he was completely bandaged up from his head to his toes, completely covered in bandages. And of course, he was fully sedated and couldn't speak. And he died that day. And these things happen. It's not just in combat, it's any accident on the ground, in the air, some malfunction, something happens, and it's unfortunate. There was another time when I was sitting at the north end of the runway waiting to taxi down, but there was a plane taking off, P-37, and I watched it as it came towards me. I was waiting for him to clear his takeoff, and I was going to taxi down, and I watched him, and he came up halfway up the runway, and nothing, he wasn't taking off, his wheels were still on the ground. And then I saw a puff of black smoke pouring out of his exhaust, and I knew he just shoved his throttles all the way forward. Something had happened, and he wasn't getting enough power to take off. He went right by me, not more than 30 yards away. I saw his face as he went by me, but then to the runway. And he couldn't take off, and he just slid off the end of the runway. And he went down that 100-foot drop and crashed, and exploded, and burned. And I later found out that this was Joe Parker, the chief test pilot of Republic. He had more time every model of the P-47 than any pilot in the world. They were top pilot. And he had been sent down to Hiroshima to teach those combat pilots how to take off complete full load, full armor, full ammo, 2 external gas tanks, 300 gallons each. And he was going to show them how to do it. And he failed.
You know, I know those are difficult stories to tell, and everyone here is very grateful for your courage to do so, and also I can feel a tremendous amount of sympathy and love and respect coming back from the room. So our gratitude, and I think if I could, I would like to bring us back to a place that brings us to present time, Dino, and because you mentioned that we never know where we're going to go, so in honoring my relationship with you, while I have you, I would like to ask you, when's the last time you saw a 38?
The last time I saw a 38, it must have been the P-38 pilots reunion in Chino, California. God, it's got to be 20 years ago.
Okay. Well, what we're hoping to do, as you said, is as I told the crowd, we are hoping to get you and John Murtha, Saul Nova, and Jack Bannon, the last remaining members from your squad, here, so that everybody who's looking at me now can meet you. And we're going to work really hard together to make that happen. Okay, do you know?
Yeah, I would love to make it. I would love to come out. But don't forget, in a couple of weeks, I'm 94 years old. And all you people out there, take a photo of the P-38. Great airplane.
I think there's more photos of the P-38 here than there is anywhere. Dino, oh my God, Dino, do you know who just spoke up?
There's one other thing I
Oh,
want to
Dino,
tell you.
hold on, I'll tell you. Chris Beatty just said hello from the crowd.
Hi.
He told me, Chris, he told me to look for you and make sure you and I make contact. He spoke about you.
I want to say one more thing I forgot, but it's a very interesting thing.
Go ahead.
Do I have time?
I'm getting 60 seconds, Dino.
60 seconds. When we checked out in the P-38, there's no piggyback on it. You go in there and you're all alone, so you can't make mistakes. And part of the training, part of what we had to do, we had to sit in that cockpit for hours memorizing every location, every dial, every toggle switch, every instrument. And before they allowed us to take off, they blindfolded us. And an instructor sat on the wing and named all the toggle switches, all the dials, all the gauges, and you have to point to them immediately, know exactly where they were, because when you fly, you can't watch what's in the cockpit. You have to look around. You have to keep your eyes moving on a swivel. And that was,
I tell you, Dino, I think most car drivers these days could use that lesson. Dino, we'd like to thank you. I'm going to take one last round.
have a great day. Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah!
Thank you, everybody, for your time. It really means a lot to me.
Okay, now please welcome P-38 National Association President Art Newman.
Hello everyone, my name is Art Newman. You just said I'm the president of the P-38 National Association. We have a museum down the 215. We have a museum down by the 215 freeway Van Buren exit, right across the freeway from the National Cemetery. I hope most of you know where that is by now. Is that better? Okay. We have 653 members. 245 of those are lifetime members. We have a lot of displays. We have several dioramas. And we have a full-size replica of a P-38 in our hangar. Most of what we do there is educating the public when they come in. To see the faces of kids when they walk in and see this plane, they're absolutely in awe of it. And to talk to people that don't have a lot of knowledge about World War II history or this particular plane, it is extremely rewarding. Everybody here, including me and everybody here on this dais, has a certain interest in either World War II or the P-38 or any other warplane that's out in the tarmac there. So we have a shared interest, and we also have a responsibility to share that fascination with this with other people. Because if everybody here is fully aware that World War II era fighter pilots, soldiers, sailors, and airmen are fading away very quickly. So to have that phone call we just had was absolutely fantastic. But getting back to the museum, we are into preserving the history of that plane, the pilots, the crew, everybody involved in it. You can spend at least 2 to 3 hours in our museum and be educated on certain things, different fighter groups, photo reconnaissance. A lot of the photographs we had here today, we have there in our museum. So it's a fascinating experience. I know we're short on time. I just want to share one quick story that happened yesterday. I got a call the night before to go shooting. I'm a member of a private gun range in the city of Paris. And the gentleman that invited me was 91 years old. He was a Seabee in World War II. When he landed on the particular island, I don't remember what island he said, he was getting shot at by a sniper up in a palm tree. And as most of you know, the Japanese soldiers were tied up in those trees that were camouflaged extremely well. So he was shot at, he grabbed his M1, he found him because he saw his foot hanging down the palm tree. And M1s don't have a really long distance, maybe 200 yards accurate. He shot him, the Japanese soldier fell, I'm sorry this is traumatic for everyone, took his rifle, he had his rifle. So we shot that rifle yesterday. And it was the most fascinating experience to watch this gentleman, 91 years old, set up on a rest and shoot that gun. It was 5 to 6 feet off his target, but he did shoot 10 rounds. So we videotaped the whole thing, and it just gives me tingles, for lack of a better word. It is the most rewarding experience that I can imagine. I get the shot to shoot the actual thing, and we were shooting at clays 100 yards away. It was just fun. I invite everyone here to come visit our museum. It's not too far away. We're at March Air Reserve Base, right there on the tarmac. I would like to invite every single one in here to become a member also. It's $30 a year. You get all kinds of stuff. We have a little table right back there. So I would invite all of you to go back and look at that table before you leave today. And I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. slow down a little bit. Okay, from the 475th Fighter Group Historical Foundation, also on the board of Pacific Aviation Museum, please welcome Brad Ball and Chris Madison.
Brian, do you want the clicker or do you have a backup clicker over there? They spare no expense. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brad Ball. It's a real pleasure to tell you a bit of the story about the 475th. And before I introduce a very important friend that is here, one thing I know about addressing a group of veterans or a group of experts on any subject is to never act like the smartest guy in the room, because there's plenty of people out there that really know the real story or are saying that isn't right. I'm going to have to point that out. So I'll just ask you to keep it to yourself.
Straight to the point.
Sitting here, hearing Mike Smith and Gino, what a treat. We have to have Gino meet PJ, I bet they have met. And thank you, Jeff, for that. And Brian on the Yamamoto story. There is just no end of the knowledge, and waiting when Kevin gets up here as he does each month. There's no end to the knowledge that you gain as a member of the Plains of Fame. And I do encourage the 5 of you, and we know exactly where you're sitting, so please join on a permanent basis. But when I learned that the XP-38 set that speed record but ended up on a golf course and crashed into a trap, I realized in my earlier life, I too must have been a P-38 pilot, because I could hit a trap every day. So here's what I'd like to begin by saying. Yes, the P-38 is a remarkable airplane, but it's topped by the remarkable men in the air and on the ground that kept it flying. And the story of the 475th is just one great story of why that plane lives on as one of the all-time favorites. Sitting next to me, a friend of mine, Chris Madison, 30 years ago, introduced me to his father, Pete Madison, and you'll hear a story about that. But 30 years ago, when I met Pete Madison, Chris told me he was a P-38 pilot. We walked into his office, and I was like a kid meeting Elvis or the Beatles for the first time in my life. Pete Madison is responsible for the 475th hangar and museum, along with help from other fellow members of his squadron. Unbelievable work by Lee Northrup. And now today we have Larry Tobas, who is also responsible for the museum design and the artifacts. And I encourage those of you that haven't already had a chance to see where the 23 Skidoo is normally parked, please go take a look. It's a remarkable airplane, and it served a remarkable purpose because, as you heard throughout the morning, the battle in the South Pacific was not going well. The Japanese had made so many entrenchments and had so many bases for which they could continue to maintain what MacArthur needed, which was to make that return back to the Philippines as he had promised. But there was a slight problem, and that slight problem was the need for the right kind of aircraft. The story is best summed up in a very short video, which I'd love to have you see right now, and then we'll carry on with our commentary. One of our board members, Joe Kentz, has been shooting videos as a board member of the 475th for 20 years, and this quick story will help us.
The preface of the official history of the 475th Fighter Group states that the urgent necessities of war brought it into existence. It grew up and thrived on combat. Its performance has justified its existence. Perhaps that one statement accurately summarizes the subsequent history of the 475th Fighter Group. It was born on the exigencies of the New Guinea Air War. Its pilots were the most daring, aggressive, and well-drilled in the Southwest Pacific, and it carved an impressive record from the time that it entered combat. The late Pete Madison, a lieutenant in the 475th, summed up the reason the group was so impressive during the war. It wasn't just the aircraft, but the men who flew them.
I think, frankly, I agree with Colonel McDonald that if the planes were interchanged between the Zeros and P-38s, the Americans still would have won.
The pilots being sent to the Pacific Theater were young men of various ages. They were all trained first in the U.S. and then sent to fight the war. Retired Air Force Colonel Perry Dahl, a young 19-year-old lieutenant and fighter ace during the war, describes his and a fellow pilot's introduction into the 432nd Squadron of the 475th.
We reported to this commander, and he looked at Joe, and then he looked at me. You know, I'm all of 5'5", you know, and weighed 130 pounds or something. And Joe was all white-haired, and I looked like maybe 14 or 15. And his remarks, of course, were, "My God, they're sending us old men and kids."
Once the young pilots were welcomed to the squadrons, they became part of the family. Lieutenant Thomas Sims still talks greatly about some of the people that he served with in the unit.
It was such a new experience. You get over there and there was absolutely nothing, and start living in a pup tent, or a 2-man tent, I guess it was, and move to an 8-man tent with 4 people in it, and up off the ground where it's drier. And we had a lot of fun. And we kidded around a bit, I guess.
Sometimes some unusual people performed with the 475th. One special person showed up in July 1944 and flew with them through August of the same year. Colonel McDonald thought this unusual person was familiar to him, but he did not think it could be the person that stuck out in his mind. That person was Charles Lindbergh. Lindbergh taught the 475th members how to conserve fuel for long trips and accompanied them on many trips, showing them that his system worked. Lieutenant William Jekyll remembers having Lindbergh flying in his formation. Let's get his impression of this unusual man.
Yes, I remember Lindbergh very well, so I couldn't believe it when we had Lindbergh there. And to say that, like for me, to say that you led the squadron with Lindbergh behind you, when you talk about most memorable occasions, that's probably the most memorable thing when you start to fly in the P-38, is flying and knowing that Colonel Lindbergh was behind you somewhere in this flight, headed off to the Helm Yards or wherever we were going. Yes, most memorable.
Like many families, the 475th had some very special family members. These members included the second highest scoring ace, Thomas McGuire, and the third highest, Colonel McDonald. Only Colonel McDonald lived to a ripe old age. Major McGuire met his fate over the Philippine Islands in 1945. The 475th continued their fight in the Philippines through the spring and early summer of 1945. They finished the war on July 21st, 1945, with 551 enemy aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat, with the loss of only 56 P-38s. It was also the only fighter group formed from the outset exclusively with P-38s. Over a 2-month period from November through December of 1944, the 475th destroyed 169 enemy aircraft during the Philippines campaign for the loss of only 9 P-38s. The 475th built up a kill ratio throughout the entire war of 11-to-1. As time passes and the memory of this war fades, the men who gave their lives are yet remembered by the men they served beside. The skill and dedication of all the men of the 475th are remembered by the grateful nation whose liberty they helped preserve.
The 475th arrived in the nick of time because the war was in a desperate strait, and as you heard me say, MacArthur had to find the right leadership. He had to find that leadership because there's no secret, this next slide, there's no secret that without control of the skies, you aren't going to win this battle with the distance that is fought over oceans and jungles. And MacArthur made a very, very wise decision due to this urgent necessity, and he appointed General George Churchill Kenny, who was a fighter pilot during the First World War, 2 kills to his credit, the 91st Aero Squadron. And between wars, Kenny ended up being in charge of development of aircraft at Dayton Air Force Base, as well as other locations, as an MIT graduate. So here he had air-to-air combat experience, and he could hold a slide rule. Pretty good combination. And with that capability, he saw the weaknesses and the strengths and made many recommendations. And MacArthur picked Kenny to be his guy to fortify and straighten out the 5th Air Force, to figure out how they were going to get to daylight bombing, fighter escort, and get those Japanese bases and ports destroyed so they could return to the Philippines and ultimately back to Japan. In their way, however, was none other than that lighter and tighter aircraft, the A6M2, the famous Japanese Zero. This airplane was 2,100 pounds lighter than a P-40 C model, whereas the J model P-38 was 8,400 pounds heavier than the Zero. So the pilots of the 475th and any P-38 do one thing: you don't out-dogfight a Zero. You outthink them, you out-tactic them, you get high, you dive fast. Hopefully you already were outfitted with dive brakes, because the original dive brake is the ground. That's a bad solution. So as an MIT graduate, there was no question that George Kenney was the right man for the job. He had the experience. And that's one of the reasons that we did in fact see General Douglas MacArthur return. Only this time his quote probably should have read, one more slide, sorry. I shall return with P-38s and the 475th. Because that aircraft and its men played a huge role in pushing the Japanese basically out of the war. Now to do that, McKinney determined the very best place to go would be Australia, one because they could use that as a training base, and it was close to New Guinea, which would be their first real assignments. So as MacArthur set this up and Kenney got the team lined up, there were not a lot of aircraft available. You already heard Doolittle sending back the famous models that were used in Europe, and they weren't particularly wonderful. This aircraft carrier shows aircraft coming back, the ultimate hand-me-downs, and they were not as good, obviously, as the later variants that were critical, but that's what they needed to do. And they spent 3 months training in Amberley, which is just outside of Brisbane, which was the major supply area. And then they were ready to make their move. And there were 2 key targets, Wewak and Rabaul. And if they could knock those out with daylight bombing, well escorted, and skip bombing, and strafing that the P-38 was so famous for, they had an excellent shot of not only moving the Japanese off New Guinea and New Britain and all of the other islands, but most importantly, they could rebalance what was going on in the war. Those significant bases didn't stand a chance against the 38, and as you heard on the film, 285 kills during 557 combat missions during the first 4 months of their deployment once activated. And they were activated in May of 1943. By the way, throughout their 24-month tour during their time from the mid-43 to the end of the war, they were averaging 20 kills per month. The Japanese pilot wanted nothing to do with this airplane. As you heard, the concentration of firepower straight through the nose was something that they just would actually turn and run, live to fight another day if it was possible. Fork-tailed devil, you've heard that expression, that was actually coined by the German pilots. The Japanese referred to this aircraft as 2 planes, 1 pilot, because that's what they saw when they saw those twin engines. Now, the 475th, as I mentioned, Chris Madison, along with P.J. Dahl, when Chris's father passed away, really put their backbone into what was then a very small exhibit. And I know with some time today, we should be done around 6 or so tonight. The idea that you'll have the chance to go take a peek at some of the real stories behind this, I think would be some time well spent. But I'd like to tell one quick story that I heard firsthand from Pete when he was alive, and many times from Chris himself. Thank you, Chris. Right on cue, you handed me this. The next slide is going to show a picture of young Pete Madison underneath his the nose art on his plane, Fluff and Lace. Chris's grandfather was a pilot instructor and taught his son the basics of flying, and would hold dinner parties with the other pilots they were training when they were only 16, 17 years old. And a friend of his brought the daughter over, who was still only 14 or 15, and at that point, Pete Madison said, I'm gonna marry that girl someday. And as a result of that first love at first sight, he took a look at her and named his plane after her, which he called Fluff and Lace. But it was a marriage that was almost not to happen, because one day on a strafing mission to take out some freighters parked in the bay, young Pete Madison, early in his hours as a combat pilot, dove at this freighter, and as he was letting it fill up with lead, he pulled back on the stick to climb above the mast. But his settings, his manifold settings, they just weren't correct. I know the feeling. It was like my Volkswagen bus with the marching band in the back going up the Cajon Pass. I mean, there was no power in this plane. And just when you think you're going to miss that mast on the freighter, his right engine clips the top, breaks one of the propellers off, and flies through the back of the bubble canopy, nicking badly Pete in the neck. Wait, it gets worse. He's upside down 200 feet above the bay. A lot of angry Japanese pointing rifles and everything else at him. At that point, Hal Gray, his wingman, says, "Pete, push forward on the stick and kick the rudder hard," which he does. They look at each other, kind of thank each other, wave. One engine, bank off, and head 150 miles back across the ocean on one engine. Not very aerodynamic, not very airworthy, but it was flying. And as it's losing its ability to fly, and it's questionable as to whether or not it's going to make it, wait, it gets worse. Hal tells him to drop his auxiliary tanks. But he had no radio because the antenna was taken off with the propeller that broke through the back. And as he's flying on one engine, no radio contact, Hal is mimicking the idea of dropping your fuel tank so that you'll have a little better shot at making it. And Hal drops his perfectly good government paid for auxiliary fuel tanks to get the idea. And Pete Madison says, "Oh, that's what you were trying to tell me." So he drops. Wait, it gets worser. That's a new word. He finally makes it to base, lands, puts his gear down, which did work, and just sits, stunned in the air. Thank you, Chris. Stunned in the aircraft, not getting out, smoking badly. Hal buzzes him at treetop level to get his attention. He brings him kind of back to his senses because he was sitting there filling out his logbook. Today's mission was actually very eventful. I lost my fuel tank, a propeller hit me in the head. I have a comedian as a wingman. I mean, the guy was absolutely stunned, but he came to it, got out of that aircraft, which exploded 30 seconds later. In our hangar, not only do we have cups and t-shirts you can buy, no, we have a photograph of that aircraft sitting in its destroyed state and a painting of the description I just gave you of this amazing story. And yes, Pete Madison married Miss Fluff and Lace, and here is their son, Chris. Pete's wild ride, indicative of so many stories that the war produced and so many remarkable attributions to the P-38's ability. One that I would like to do now, and I want to thank Jeff for introducing us to Dino. Dino and Jeff had the opportunity with an unlimited budget to do live interviews with their ace. But we had to drop PJ Dahl off at a Denny's in Ontario. He's working out of his car, so we're going to get PJ Dahl, a remarkable ace, on the phone. Just take a look at his record as a member of the 432nd Squadron in the 475th Fighter Group. 287 missions, 9 enemy kills, 2 tours of duty in Southeast Asia, and then this many honors for his military service throughout those years. But last week, Brian Finnegan and I had the chance to call PJ, who lives in Florida, and like Dino, is in the twilight of his life, but you would never know it. I mean, this guy, like Dino, sounds like he's 40. And if you call him before the martini hour, you're going to get some pretty interesting stories, which we did. We're going to take you through those right now. It's because PJ Dahl turns 95 in February. So our first question, if we can get PJ on the phone. goes something like this. You know, it's great to have you here, and we salute you, PJ, for all that you've done, and all that you've done to have those people that honor the P-38 and the ground crews that help keep them flying. But tell us how you ended up as a military pilot during the Second World War.
I was a senior in high school and joined the 41st Infantry Division in Seattle, Washington. When Pearl Harbor came, I ended up at Mount Vernon, Washington, on a rooftop looking for the Japanese to land. And I looked over there, and there were a bunch of observation airplanes, and there was the pilots were sitting out there drinking their beer and having a good time. And I thought, boy, that's it just so happened. 4 days later, the first church came in and said, hey, if any of you guys can pass 2 years equivalent of college, and you can pass the rigid physical stuff, you may qualify to go to Asia. And I and that's like the best we do about it.
So you joined as a young lad and you wanted that beer, but most of all you wanted the thrill of flying fast aircraft. Tell us, what was your first day on the job as a fighter pilot?
The first mission I was on was Tour of Ball, and it was a complete disaster for me. We ordered a battle with like 40 to 50 enemy fighters in the area. We went in real low on the deck. I got me in the B-25. We got jumped by a bunch of zeros and everything. Make a long story short, I got all mixed up. It was a disaster, so I could we lost 2 airplanes, and we flew back. I had 20 holes in the airplane. We were rather disheartened because one of the other guys went down, so there were 4 of us in the tent. Now there are only 3 of us.
You know, PJ, throughout today's session, we've heard story after story of what a remarkable aircraft is. I think you actually told me once it's in a class by itself. Tell us why.
The name of the game is you're up there, you're fighting for your life, you're doing what you're supposed to do when you're a wingman on that particular element. You stay right with it. When I strapped that machine gun to my butt with 2 Allison, almost 2,000 horsepower engines, I could take on the world, you know, the great equalizer. It was a hell of a I felt that airplane was so good. When I got engaged in combat with the Japanese, I figured it wasn't fair fight. The airplane was so versatile because of its twin-engine capability. It was in a class by itself, I think.
PJ, some of us have heard that you actually flew 4 different P-38s during your time in New Guinea.
And you got to remember, I destroyed 4 P-38s myself. The last airplane I destroyed was in a mid-air collision. I was leading the squadron company that helped the B-25, so we were making straight runs and skip bombing on the Japanese Navy and the troop transports that they were bringing down. I got a mid-air collision there. I did with the guerrillas for several months, and when I got back, Colonel McDonald called me, the group commander, and said, PJ said, how many P-38s you lost now? I said, well, that's my 4th one. He said, well, you lose one more, you're going to be the Japanese case.
PJ, everybody in this room, including so many veterans, deserve the entire country and the world's thanks, and we want to extend that to you. You went on to do duty in Korea as well as Vietnam in some very high-ranking roles and made a difference. Maybe you could just wrap it up by asking us, why is it important that these stories continue to be told?
Let me give you a little lyrics. You know, by the ring around his eyeball, you can tell a bombardier. And you can tell a bomber pilot by the spreading of his rear. And you can tell a navigator by his section, maps and such. And you can tell a fighter pilot, but you can't tell the clutch. Young people do not have the opportunity to learn about God and country and all the other attributes that you get from serving in the military unless they hear and read about things like the 475th by the Venice people. I've traveled all over with my motorhome, and so life's been good. And I appreciate, again, what you guys are doing. God bless you.
Let's wish PJ a happy 95th birthday. He's going to hear everybody forming As we wrap up this section and we turn it back to Kevin, I just want to say a couple of remarks. Every conversation, every visit I've had the pleasure over the years with PJ and colleagues like his other members, and pilots, the ground crews from the 475th, and meeting people here, we paid the ultimate price for our freedom, and it just brings me personal joy. It's something that I think growing up in the early 50s, I absolutely dreamt of being able to do. I wasn't smart enough to know better that you didn't want to do that necessarily until you realized what was at stake. But this patch in the middle of the 475th, with the Latin phrase that I won't attempt to read, translates to be joyful in battle. And when you meet these people, and you meet their positive attitude every day, despite the fact that there's really nothing joyful at all about war and the misery and what comes with it, but every day, as they strap themselves into that aircraft, put on their shoes, and head out on that mission, it's what PJ exemplifies, and we heard Dino the same way, that their job was their calling, and it wasn't something they shied away from. They did it so very well. This report card, this parent-teacher conference that the 475th had was remarkable, and you heard bits and pieces of it. But the ratio of those that were shot down versus those they ended up shooting down is relatively, if not absolutely, unmatched. 40 aces emerged. Here's McGuire with Lindbergh. And what we know about this is that it's a story that does have to continue, because I'm going to tell what Brian told me many times that I've been here. A school teacher with some high school students were here to learn about everything that's here. And one of the teachers asked Brian if he could tell her students about World War XI. True. We at the 475th take our role and our commitment to keeping these stories alive seriously. Right down the way, this is where the hangar display is, but we also have a second location in Seattle at the Museum of Flight. And just recently, and I was asked to be on the board of the Pacific Aviation Museum in Pearl Harbor, added our third installment. I know this sounds like a sales pitch for Jerome's Furniture. That's not what we're doing at all. We want this story to get in front of as many people possible so that it can live on. And with Chris's help, and with his father started, the 475th has had a reunion for 52 years of their pilots, their ground crews getting together. And we just had the one in Chino in 2016, 2017. I think you were in Nashville, Chris. And what, Jeff, you're trying to do is absolutely wonderful, because these stories will live on. And as we know, the Satan's angels made their presence felt. I just want to thank all of you for coming to this session. I want to hand it back to Jeff, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Is everybody's butt good and sore right now from sitting in those plastic chairs? Everybody get up and stretch. Stand up, stretch.
Yeah.
If you can. If you can't, just remain seated. Stretch a minute. What we're going to do is we ran way over our schedule, so what we're going to do is I've got a closing thing here which ties into a book sale that we've got today. Just relax a minute, stretch, stand up. Because we don't have a rental for this building tonight, I've been allowed to go a little bit past noontime, so that allowed me to do my deal, which was supposed to be, done by now. But anyway, so the thing is the P-38 is going to be flying, and everywhere in the compound here, the museum compound is an excellent vantage point. If you've been here before, you know the drill. If you haven't been here before, anywhere, if you're out there getting a burger from Two Guys Grilling, or you're out by the hangars, whatever, it's always a good view. We're going to see if Johnny can delay his takeoff just a few minutes so I can finish this. That's what we're working on right now. That's what Harry Geyer's doing for me, so I really appreciate that, by the way. So anyway, get your stretch in there. And how many people were here in 2011 for our P-38? Can you remember back that far? 7 years ago, cool. Okay, how many people, we'll do this in a little while, Bill, thank you. Where do you need it now? Need the raffle number now? Because I got about 15 minutes to run here. Okay, we're all right? How many people remember Lynn Schubert? You guys remember Lynn? Okay, yeah. We're going to run some video of him here in 2011. But anyway, Lynn came back from the war and he wrote these stories. And he claimed, he wrote these stories and basically he kept them for years and years and years. Well, he never published them. He did do some things in acting on Broadway, also in some television, early television, things like that. But anyway, this book has come out, and it's called Brave and Funny Memories of World War II by a P-38 fighter pilot. It's a long title, but it's very descriptive. Lynn Schubert wrote everything in here. Now, his wife Betty is right here. And by the way, Betty's going to be 93 later this month. It's Betty Schubert. Betty Castle Schubert. If it wasn't for her, this book would have never happened. She compiled all these stories, turned them into chapters. Actually, he had them somewhat categorized, but she put this whole thing together, and we got a book done. She invited me. Actually, Dana Welch was very instrumental in getting a hold of me so I could read the book and then give him an endorsement, which, of course, I knew Lynn from years ago, but hadn't seen him in a while. Well, so it turns out I get the manuscript from her, and I decide, I look at it, I said, would you like me to edit it? And she goes, sure, go ahead and edit it.
They were fun. I found these stories that Lynn had written, and he was a brilliant writer, and he never showed them to me because I wasn't that interested in the war. I also found that Lynn at the moment is in late stages of Alzheimer's. He can't even remember my name. He has a full head of hair, hasn't even turned white. He has no wrinkles because he has no worries. But I found photographs that he had taken when he was serving in Bari, Italy in World War II. And they're published for the first time. They illustrate his stories. And it's got rave reviews from fabulous people. And I know you'll enjoy it. What I did is I organized brave and funny stories because they have a great sense of humor. And they're written in a self-deprecating way, like New Guy in the Sky attacked by 4 Messerschmitts, Achtung, or AWOL in Rome with a USO dancer. Those kind of stories. And the Lucky Gut stories that he also wrote, I'm donating those to the World War II Museum in Louisiana. That these are brave and funny, and the first time he was in war, every time he thought he was going to die, and he was terrified. But most flyers won't tell you how they actually felt. But he lived through it. He won the Distinguished Flying Cross. He pioneered the teleprompter. He taught 3 presidents how to use the teleprompter, including Kennedy and almost through Winston Churchill. He's a fabulous guy, and he tells these wonderful stories, and I know you will love it.
All right, so we're going to do a quick PowerPoint with some of the highlights and some of the photos from the book. So let's see here. Let me get my cheat sheet going here. Okay, Earl Lynn Schubert, born in 1921, raised in Alameda, California. Had a football scholarship at the University of Arizona and also took acting classes. Enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Force Cadets Program in December 1941 while attending the University of Arizona. Both these pictures are him in cadet training in Santa Maria, California around 1943. Primary training in Stearman PT-13 and PT-17 biplanes. Here's his graduation picture, Class 44C, Luke Airfield, Arizona. And then you can barely see it's cut off here, but he's earned his wings here. And it's just about time when he's getting ready to ship overseas. Okay, this is his first wife, named Patty, and they're in a motel in Marin County. This is the night before he's due to ship out. And really didn't quite know where he was going to go yet, was very apprehensive about the war. If you read the chapter in the book, he mentions where he just doesn't think he's going to live through it. He thinks this is the last goodbye, and that's it, they're never going to see each other again. Fortunately, he was wrong, but you got to read the book, because of the way Lynn portrays this. Brave and funny is exactly, if you know Lynn, you know the way he writes, you know the way he speaks, it's fantastic. So you'll have to read up on that. But anyway, this was right before he was due to ship out. And then this is this is Lake Garda, Italy, which is way up in the center of Italy, in the northern part of it. And there's an interesting story about a navigator in a Droop Snoot P-38 in this book, where he mistakes Lake Garda for the Adriatic Sea. Not a very good navigator. Again, that's another funny, it goes a lot more than just a navigator in a Droop Snoot. The guy has to relieve himself up at high altitude, and all kinds of funny things happen. With Lynn at the wheel, you know it would. This is Red Bull's P-38, but it's an image from the book. He had trained stateside in the P-39. You know, Steve Weinman and I brought a whole bunch of P-38 models. We brought about 7 of them. You guys can look at them afterwards. I included a P-39 in there because a lot of the guys that ended up flying P-38s were trained in the 39 before they actually assigned to the 38. So I put it in there as a token Air Cobra. But anyway, Lynn was assigned to the 154th. Let me go back here. He was in Italy. There's an old castle in Italy that was commandeered by the U.S. Army Air Force as a radio and radar control center, and they just nicknamed it Big Fence. And then here's an Italian farmer with his donkey cart, which played a part in Lynn's dream of precognition. Again, a fascinating chapter in this book about where he envisions ahead of time. He has a premonition about what's going to happen, and it doesn't look good. And as the mission starts, all these things are starting to happen as he envisioned them. It's pretty interesting as well. And this donkey cart plays a part in that. You got to read the book. I got 110 of them here for sale. Be more than happy to sign them. Okay, 154th Weather Recon Squadron, 15th Army Air Force. It says, my babies and my boys, and they're flying the P-38, probably J or L models there. I can't really tell you. They were armed P-38s. Now, what the 154th Weather Squadron did is if they were going to do a mission, if they're going to send 100 bombers up in the air, 1,000 men, or 200 or 300 bombers up in the air, several thousand men, and they're going to bomb something, either northern Italy or lower part of Germany, or wherever they're going. They want to know if they can do the mission, if the weather's going to be all right a few hours ahead of time. So what Lynn used to do in these things, he'd take off at 2 in the morning from Bari, Italy, fly north. And he'd scope out the weather for wherever the strike was going to happen later that day. He'd scope the weather out to make sure that, hey, it's doable or it's not doable. Because you don't want to have 300 bombers warming up, ready to go, and all the crew is in there and ready to go, and all of a sudden, no, we got to scrap the mission. I mean, that would be, or they're already airborne and you got to scrap the mission because they didn't know about the weather. That's what the Weather Recon Squadron did. Lynn usually flew with a partner. They usually flew in pairs. And in his first combat, the first time he's actually shot at by Germans, he admitted it. He was overwhelmed and he froze up. This is the first time he'd ever been shot at. He froze up and he made a few mistakes flying the airplane. But one of the things he made a mistake on was having one engine, both engines died, he got one engine running, and that engine went full power, while the other engine was still idling or slow. The plane went into such convulsions, there was no way those Messerschmitts could keep up with it. You'll see in the video, he said he created a new evasive maneuver. There he is, nice picture of him in that. The old ace is written on that picture. And then this is a great shot because he just returned from a mission there. He's got all his equipment, his Colt 45, his oxygen mask, his heated suit, and then the fuel truck's resurfacing the airplane back there. I like that picture. It's a good one. He's young there, huh?
God, he looks like a kid. Yeah.
And okay, we heard stories today about guys flying P-38s on 1-engine long ranges, okay? So Lynn was not, no exception. He got shot up over Austria by the Germans, and he had to fly back 400 miles on 1 engine, a P-38. But 400 miles, you know, with reduced airspeed, you don't have both engines going. It's going to take a while, as long as he had the fuel to do it. But anyway, when he was approaching the base to land, the hydraulics failed also. So therefore, he didn't have a landing gear and all that, so he just did a belly-up landing, you know, with it, and wheels up on the belly landing. And this is a, I think this was made by his step-grandson, I believe, for a school project. This thing before the crash and after, I believe that was made. I think that's what read. Anyway, Spring 45, Lieutenant Lynn Schubert examines the remains of his twin-tailed P-38 shot up by the German FW-190s over Austria. With 1 engine destroyed, he flew his plane over 400 miles to home base Bari, Italy, with no hydraulics and unable to lower his wheels and crash landed the plane. So it shows him before and after. Okay, this is the, you got it. This is USO dancer Maxine Turner in spring 1945 in Rome. What was unusual about this is that Lynn had taken her to his junior prom in high school, and they met up again in Italy while she was on USO, and he was getting ready to pretty soon going to head out back home. What's the coincidence of that, huh? And this pretty lady right here, this is Betty, and they got married in 1987. 30 years now, absolutely. Going to be 31 soon. And Lynn was also a Broadway actor after the war, acted alongside Spencer Tracy. And he was also a writer, actor in classic TV as well as Broadway. As Betty said, he was a pioneer of teleprompter industry and a business executive with ITEA, the International Theater Equipment Association. And here he is reunited with the cockpit of a P-38. This is probably about, I don't know, 7, 8, 10 years ago. He always laughed at the guys when they got, the old guys when they got in the P-38s and they had trouble getting back out. He says, come on. Well, he got in and he was all comfortable, having a great time, and couldn't get out without him. But he sure looks like he's enjoying himself. Let's ride at home in that thing again. And then, of course, this is our Skidoo. These are shots that were taken here from the 2011 visits. That's a great one. That's the one that was featured on the cover of the book. And then this is a thing at his a school day honoring him. And there's a whole bunch of different memorabilia there, pictures of him, some of which you can see here. It was like a VIP day at a elementary school. And this is a familiar surrounding, is it not? Late great Ed Maloney right there in the center. And of course our P-26, which is in the same position. But anyway, yeah, this is the last time that he was here, that Lynn was here. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And of course, this is the book. Now again, we have them on sale. The books here are $13 a piece. And we've got like 100 of them. So, you know, if you want one, come on up after we're done. But what I'm going to do to whet your appetite, we're going to run about a 7-minute video. And this is with Lynn's last visit here at Plains of Fame.
And he claims to have been kicked out of the 82nd Fighter Group. So this is Mr. Lynn Schubert.
I got kicked out of it. I forget numbers. I've had a stroke. So the stroke now allows me to get by with any stories I tell, whether they're true or not. I got a lot of stories. I'm a columnist for the magazine, Lightning Strikes. So you've probably read some of my work. One of the best known is Abel in Rome with the USO dancer. Very successful. But if you want to be successful, if you don't do it in 3.5 minutes, I'm going to shoot you. So I'm going to start talking fast. I've had one funny experience in my life. I did get thrown out of the 97th Squadron. I can't even remember the damn number. I don't really. I'm not going to tell you why I was kicked out, but I was invited to leave. And I left, and it gave me down to guard to apply for generals. Training. I can't talk as much as I used to because I did have a stroke. And anyway, I ended up down there, and they were not delighted to have me either. But anyway, they made me start to fly, and I flown the P-38, and tried going through all the things. Anyway, on my 2 or 3 missions without anything happening, and it didn't like my formation flying, and I think they're trying to kill me off. Anyway, I'm flying along with the first time I got into combat, with one guy. Actually, we've always worked just with the 2 of us in the South. And I did we were doing a fast week, which was high-speed switches, and so that he covers your tail all the time. And we were flying back, and we were quite ways separated, and all of a sudden, he says, they're coming at you from the rear, and I'm looking around, I can see the airplanes, and I'm flying along pretty fast, I'm looking for them, and just as the first 2, the next week, you got 4 guys, they're leaving behind you, so no matter what you ever do, you're covered. And anyway, I just was flying straight level, wondering what to do. And all of a sudden, 2 guys were on my ass and ready to take me out of there. Well, I was flying top speed, I got shoved that damn rock throttle forward, and I'm trying to decide what to do. This is the first time I've seen it. Damn German. And while I'm thinking about it, they come in and are ready to fire. But I gotta get out of here, so I shoved the damn throttle to the top. And all of a sudden they started to shoot at me. I didn't like that, but I didn't know quite what to do. And as they got me in the position where they were going to shoot me, both my engines quit. And I'm sucking gas for the tanks. And, oh, damn it, the gas is gone. The hell do I do now? Well, I'm doing that. Just as they're starting to shoot, oh, I must clean up my language. You were in that cockpit, anyway, they start firing at me. Both my engines quit. Oh, yeah, the guys have gunned your engines. Jumped your tanks. So, oh, that's a good idea to me. So just as they start to shoot, I dumped my tanks. I didn't take where the gasoline was going to come from. It didn't. Both my engines stopped. And those 2 guys had to split and go right by me. I can see it going by, I can be up 30 feet off my wing. And I'm just looking at it. But they're going 400 miles an hour. Not going anywhere. Okay, they're gone. They go chase my other guy. So I got 2 other guys in the back, and they come up and line up on me, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh, this guy, oh, my engine shot out, and it hit me. And I hit the pressure a ton. Anyway, I throttled forward when I was trying to get it to work. But I wasn't getting any gas. So I did switch inboard, just as these 2 guys came in behind me. And my left engine takes full blast. My right engine is dragging. I am could I say ass over teeth? I just looked around and you two guys couldn't stay with me. I didn't know what you were saying. I learned a new method of evasion. This is the best maneuver I had. One was here running forward, the other dragging it, and I just take my feet off and start control and let go. And I'm all over sky. They don't have a chance to go. It went on, and I did get back, and I did get them started. Oh, I got them started. I got one guy on out. I got my engines going. I got my guns going. I'm ready to become the Rick Troffman of our civilization. I'm ready to get to the Germans. And I'm getting my name Schubert, by the way. All right. Anyway, I ended up making 6 head-on passes as if one German, and we couldn't hit each other, I don't think. But when we were passed down to one south, he was gone north. I waved to him. He waved back. I flew back to Italy, and came in and landed. And boy, they didn't think I was going to get back. But there I came in. Did you have any problem? I said, no.
That was fun. It was like it was just yesterday. Probably won't be able to field any question and answers as we normally do. I'm going to be up here for a little while. We'll be having the book sale here, and then also we'll be, the models will be for display. There's no real hurry, but we should get the raffle in. I think we've got a raffle for a flight. I believe it's in our AT6 SNJ, and I'll pick that number right now. And that would be 444-0056. Darn, this is like 327. 444-0056. Do we have a winner? Here, come on up here. You got it? 444-0056.
You're going flying today.
All right, let's go, thanks. Thank you very much for the generosity of the Plains of Fame Library. We always have classic books on sale, and this one is in very good condition for its age. Aircraft of the United States Air Force and its NATO allies. So let me pull another ticket number here.
He's going to fly.
444-0087. Come on up. Come on up. Come on down. So anyway, again, I'd like to thank all our panelists today. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank Brian Finnegan, Eliza Sparsa, Mike Smith, Jeff Roche, Art Newman, Brad Ball, Chris Madison. Thank you all for being here today. We appreciate it. And again, also like to thank Betty Schubert. She'll be signing the books. And if it wasn't for her, this book chronicling Lynn's exploits would never have happened. So I'm proud to be a small part of it, but it's really her vision that brought them together. Thank you.